Well, guys, this morning we're going to be looking primarily at two passages. First, I'd ask you to turn to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17, we're going to be reading verses 19 and 20. And then we're going to turn back just a few pages to Matthew chapter 21, where we're going to read verses 18 through 22. So Matthew 17, verses 19 and 20, and Matthew 21, verses 18 through 22. Our title this morning is Moving Mountains. Moving Mountains. And our first passage today is one that we were actually familiar with from a few months ago. We studied this passage and talked about it a little bit. This is just after Jesus has come down from the Mount of Transfiguration, which is a whole nother sermon. And he comes down, and what he walks upon is a chaotic scene. See, there's a man whose son has been possessed by a demon. And this man has brought his son to the disciples and asked them to pray for him to cast out this demon. And they have tried to do so, just like they've done so many other times, and they were unable to do it. So Jesus walks up, and there's this scene, and the disciples are confused, and the man is confused, and everybody's disheartened. And they tell Jesus what's going on. And so Jesus says, okay, bring the boy to me. And the father brings his son to Jesus. And it says that Jesus orders the demon to come out, and the Bible says immediately the boy was cured. And that's what brings us to our text in verses 19 and 20, because what happens is Jesus then goes in the house with his disciples, and this is what happens in verse 19 and 20. It says, then the disciples came to Jesus privately and asked, why couldn't we force the demon out of the boy? He told them, because you have so little faith. I can guarantee this truth. If your faith is the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Nothing, Jesus says, will be impossible for you. Now let's turn back to Matthew 21. We're going to read verses 18 through 22. It says, in the morning, as Jesus returned to the city, he became hungry. When he saw a fig tree by the road, he went up to the tree and found nothing on it but leaves. He said to the tree, may fruit never grow on you again. At once the fig tree dried up. The disciples were surprised to see this, and they asked, how did that fig tree dry up so quickly? Jesus answered them, I can guarantee this truth. If you have faith and do not doubt, you will be able to do what I did to the fig tree. And you could also say to this mountain, be uprooted and thrown into the sea, and it will happen. Have faith that you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. Now, we're not going to discuss what Jesus did to the fig tree today. I could go into that and explain that. It seems like kind of a mean thing, but it actually had a deeper meaning behind it. We'll talk about that some other time. But today I want to tell you that I don't know about you, but I love living where we live. I really do. I like doing outdoor activities. I like going fishing, and I like going camping, and I like going hiking and even biking. And I don't think that there are many places in the world that are as beautiful and diverse in nature as Northwest Arkansas is. It's a really cool place to live. And one of the things that I love about this area is the mountains. I love that no matter where you're at in Northwest Arkansas, you can go outside and look off into the horizon and see huge land masses covered with trees. Isn't that cool? I also love, at our old church in Fayetteville, you guys may not even notice this when you drive through Fayetteville because it's not what you're looking at, but you step outside and you're on a street in a neighborhood, and then right behind it is this huge hill. Like there are massive hills all through Fayetteville. And then the further south you go, the bigger they get. I love that. I really love it in the fall when all the trees are covered with orange and red leaves. Does anybody else like that? The only time I don't like our mountains is when they're in my way. I don't like when I'm at point A and I want to get to point B and there is a mountain in between. Because that's when the mountain becomes an obstacle. That's when I want to be able to say, hey, mountain, move. Has anyone ever experienced that? Where a mountain was in your way and you're like, I just want you to move. Just get out of the way. I can pretty much guarantee that if you've spent any time hiking or biking in Northwest Arkansas, you have felt that way, especially if you use the Razorback Greenway. Man, that thing has some hills. I'm one of those guys, I don't like to get off my bike when I'm riding the bike to get off and walk it up the hill. There are some that it doesn't matter whether I like it or not. We're walking. I remember one time in particular when Christina and the kids and I were out hiking at Hobbs State Park. We actually didn't plan on going hiking that day. We were just out driving around, and I think we actually had a band banquet or something to be at later that afternoon. And we had a little time to waste, so I was like, you know what? I've been wanting to check out these primitive campsites that they have on the Pigeon Roost Trail at Hobbs. So let's go out there and let's check out these campsites. So we did. If you're thinking, man, that sounds like fun, we should go out and do that today. It's a nice, pretty day. Let's go out and do the Pigeon Roost Trail. Let me give you some advice. Don't. See, the Pigeon Roost Trail is an 8.4-mile trail that consists of 2 separate loops. And it's listed in the guide as moderate to strenuous. And I can tell you that if you don't have any water with you, and you're not really dressed to go hiking, it leans way towards the strenuous side. There came a point on that hike where I wondered if we would actually make it back up the mountain to the trailhead. It's one of the few times when we've been hiking where I've actually prayed that God would help me have the strength to finish, because I wondered if I would be able to put one foot in front of the other until I got done with the trail. And he did answer in a way. About 1.5 miles from the finish, it started raining. Now, it seems like a bad thing, but I'm telling you, I loved it. It was a lifesaver. If it had not begun raining, I believe what I would have done is sat down right there on the trail and never have gotten up again. Luckily, the rain refreshed us a little bit, and we were able to keep going, and we made it out alive and made it to the band banquet almost on time. Has anyone else ever been in a situation like that? Raise your hand if you feel me. I want to know if I'm the only one who's ever been like, I don't know if I can make it. I wish this mountain would just get out of my way. That moment when you're just not sure if you can go on any further. It's times like that when I think, did Jesus really mean that I can tell this mountain to move and it'll happen? Twice within just a few chapters, Jesus tells his disciples that if they have faith, they can tell a mountain to move and it'll happen. I want to do this. I may be the only one, but I really want to do this. Maybe it's just because I like neat things. I don't know. But someday, I want to tell a mountain to move, and I want to see it happen. Or just be a part of it. I don't care if somebody else tells it. It doesn't have to be me. I just want to see a mountain move and go into the lake. That would be cool. You know, it's funny. Over the centuries, there have been lots of men and women who were a lot smarter than me, who spend lots of time studying the Bible. And then they write commentaries to tell you what the Bible means. Many of these people, they're familiar with the original language that was spoken and the customs of the day, so they can shed light on things that the rest of us just don't understand. They can really explain what the speaker or the author of a text meant. Personally, I like digging into that kind of stuff because I'm a nerd. And nerds like to learn stuff. I mean, I'm the same kid that when I was a kid and I'd walk into a bathroom, I'd just start grabbing stuff off the medicine cabinet and reading the labels, just because I like to learn stuff. So I like these commentaries, and I like reading and learning more about the Word and digging into it. But what I hate is when the experts can't agree on what a text means. I mean, they're the experts. They should all agree, right? Like if you go to the auto shop and your wheel has an imbalance, If you go to one shop, it should be able to tell you that wheel's out of balance. You go to another shop, they should tell you the same thing because they're the experts. But if you go to one place and they tell you your wheel's out of balance and another place tells you your axle is broken, somebody's wrong, right? But this happens from time to time, and the passages that we've read today are two examples of that. There are two widely differing opinions of what Jesus meant when he spoke the words. I'm going to give you an example. Here's what one commentator wrote about Jesus telling us to move mountains. He said, "It seems rather that Jesus meant his words to be received literally, implying that if such a removal as he mentioned was ever expedient and in accordance with God's will, it would be effected by the power of faith. Not that he hereby sanctioned an arbitrary and wanton display of miraculous power," which is what I said I wanted to see, "but he gives an assurance that were such a measure rendered necessary for the cause of religion, it would be performable at the call of one whose whole trust was centered on God and whose will was one with God's will." Now, these commentary writers are kind of wordy, so let me explain that to you in Arkansas. Jesus meant what he said. Jesus meant literally, if you tell a mountain, move, and you have faith, it'll happen. So that's what the commentator said, and I was like, man, that's awesome. I'm going to go start telling mountains to move. But before I do, I want to get a little more ammunition for this argument. I want to build my faith a little more, so I'm going to grab another commentary and read it. And here's what it says. "Only a foolish literalism can occasion any perplexity in the reading of Christ's words. His disciples were too familiar with Oriental metaphors to fall into the absurd mistake of supposing that Jesus really expected them to toss mountains of rock and earth from one place to another. It was customary for the Jews to refer to a great rabbi as a remover of mountains, and therefore Christ was employing proverbial language which would be well understood by his hearers." And I'm like, what? But what? They said, and I want to. So where do we find ourselves? You got one expert telling you that Jesus meant this literally, you can move mountains. And another expert that says if you take it literally, it's foolish. You got one guy that says Jesus said what he meant, and another one that said Jesus was trying to prove a point. Today I'm going to attempt to answer two questions that come from the reading of these verses. Number one, what did Jesus mean? And number two, can we really move mountains? So let's start with number one. What did Jesus mean? Let me answer that right from the start. I'm not going to make you wait. I'm going to give it to you straight. Does everybody have your pens ready? You can write this down so you can impress your friends later and tell them what Jesus meant. What did Jesus mean when he said we can move mountains? Here's the answer. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because Jesus wasn't talking about mountains to begin with. Jesus was talking about faith. In both instances where Jesus said, if you have enough faith, you can move a mountain, he didn't care about the mountain, he cared about the faith. It doesn't matter whether Jesus was saying, you can tell this mountain to move and it will happen, or whether he was saying, you can do what seems impossible. His point was that we must have faith when we pray. We must believe, and when we do, whatever we ask will be done. You see, church, Jesus could have just as easily said, if you have faith, you could speak to the Sea of Galilee and tell it to dry up, and it would. Or he could have told his disciples, if you have faith, you can speak to this stone and tell it to become a hamburger, and it will. Or Jesus could have said, if you have enough faith, you can tell this pumpkin to become a carriage, and it can take you to the ball. Jesus' point was faith. Jesus' point was whatever we ask in faith will be done. What Jesus meant by his statement doesn't matter nearly as much as what he was trying to communicate. He was trying to communicate that with faith, nothing is impossible. There's no mountain too high. There's no river too wide. There's no valley too deep. There is no obstacle too big for God when we have faith. I think back to the book of Exodus. Moses has been faithful to God, and he has gone and told Pharaoh, let my people go. And he has delivered the Israelites out of Egypt. But then after they left, Pharaoh got mad. And he realized, what have we done? We've just given up our entire workforce. So Pharaoh takes his entire army and chases the Israelites with the intention of bringing them back. And he actually has them cornered. He has the Israelites cornered between his army with all of their chariots and the Red Sea. Now, let me tell you something about the Red Sea at this location. We're lucky that the Bible tells us where exactly they were because we can find some things out. Did you know that the Red Sea at this location was 12 miles wide? 12 miles. And the average depth at that location was 84 feet. So the Israelites are standing there between an army full of chariots and basically an ocean. It might as well be. I don't know about you, but I can't swim 12 miles in 84-foot deep water. This is no little stream that they're between, no little stream that they're up against. But it's so cool. Moses had faith. It says in Exodus 14, 21 and 22, it says, Moses stretched his hand out over the sea. All that night, the Lord pushed back the sea with a strong east wind and turned the sea into dry ground. The water divided, and the Israelites went through the middle of the sea on dry ground. The water stood like a wall on their right and on their left. No obstacle is too big for God when we have faith. Is it any more difficult for God to move a mountain than it is for him to split a sea? See, God can do anything when we have faith. We read in the book of Joshua how the Israelites, after they had crossed the Jordan, they're taking over the promised land and they're driving out God's enemies, and they come up to the city of Jericho with its massive walls. The city of Jericho, with its thousands of inhabitants, is believed to have had two sets of walls around it that were about 50 feet high. There are some who have said that these walls were so large that they would have chariot races on top of them. Huge, massive walls that were impenetrable to the Israelites. But Joshua had faith. Joshua told the Israelites, march around the city. And they marched around the city every single day for 7 days. They would march around the city in complete and total silence. People inside Jericho have got to be looking outside the walls, and the first day they're like, what are these jokers doing? They're just marching around. What, do they think the walls are going to fall down? The third day it gets a little eerie. They're like, what are these people doing? They're just walking around the walls and not saying anything. It's like they think the walls are going to fall down. On the seventh day, they march around the city of Jericho. And then when Joshua gives the command, the trumpets are blasted and everybody screams, shouts, and lifts their voice. And it says that the walls literally fell to the ground, crumbled into pieces. And the Israelites took the city. It's so cool to me how God did that. And there have been scientists who have tried to prove and disprove that theory. And some of the archaeologists there, have found that there's evidence, of earthquakes that took place under that city. And they believe that may have been what knocked the walls down. And people have tried to use that to say that it wasn't a miraculous thing of God. It was just something that happened. But who made the earthquake? And who made the earthquake happen at the exact moment in time that the Israelites shouted and blasted the trumpets. No obstacle is too big for God. We could go on and talk about lions whose mouths were held shut for Daniel when he was thrown in the lion's den. Or we could talk about 3 men who were thrown into a fire but came out unburned and not even smelling like smoke. We could tell story after story after story of God's faithfulness and how he responds when we have faith. No obstacle is too big for God. So did Jesus really mean that I can drive down to I-40 and I can look off and see Mount Magazine and I can tell Mount Magazine, hey, get out of here? And it could be moved? It doesn't matter because that's not the point. The point is, whatever obstacle you are facing, it's not too big for God. And if you have faith, you can tell that obstacle to move, and it will. If you got someone at work who's giving you problems, if you have faith and tell that obstacle to move, it will. If you're facing some situation in your health, in your body, if you can't get over back pain or you can't get over shoulder pain or like Lynn with her arm, if you tell that obstacle to move and have faith, it will. There's nothing that is too big for God. If your marriage is in trouble and you need God to heal it, he can do it because there's no obstacle that's too big for my God. If your daughter is getting ready to go to Africa for a month and you are scared to death, you just got to say, God, any obstacles she comes up on, move them. There is no obstacle that is too big for my God. The second question that I told you that I'm going to answer today is, can we really move mountains? Can we really move mountains? Here's the answer. No, you can't. But God can. You see, when people get into this argument about what Jesus meant, what they don't take into account is it's not us we're talking about moving the mountains. We're just the person who has the faith and tells the mountain to move. It's God that moves mountains. And to God, moving a mountain is nothing. We're talking about the guy that created the mountain. Nothing is impossible for God. Have you ever thought about the fact that things that seem difficult to us are easy to him? Like, they're the same amount of easy to him as things that seem easy to us. When we say, man, God, I've got a headache. Will you please take this pain away? That is just as easy for God as when we say, God, take this cancer out of my body. It's the same thing. It's funny to me that those of us who are believers, we trust that God forgives us of our sins. If he can take away our sin, why don't we believe that he can do all the other stuff he said he could do? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that to God, nothing is miraculous. It's just what he does. Things that we think are miracles are just his everyday life. It's like tying our shoes. I remember when I was a kid trying to learn how to tie my shoes. And I think I may have taken a little bit longer than some of the other kids did. We were actually talking this morning about how I'm left-handed. And I don't know, maybe that's it. Maybe all the teachers are trying to teach a right-handed method of tying your shoes. I don't know. But I would see these kids that would just twist their shoelaces around a little bit, and then all of a sudden they'd have these pretty bows. And I'd be like, no, you keep your magic. I'll keep my Velcro. But I learned after a while that Velcro isn't cool. Like, even when you try to make it seem cool, and if you're wearing Velcro shoes today, I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend you, but you should probably learn to tie your shoes. But even if you're that kid that, like me, I always had a lot of confidence and felt like I could prove my point in anything. So I would try to prove to these kids, why are you trying to learn to tie your shoes? That's stupid. Just use Velcro. Look how easy it is. Did somebody just snort? That's the person that's wearing Velcro. Tying my shoes at the time seemed impossible. But to those who knew how to do it, it was nothing. They do it without even thinking about it. And I'll show you, like, I tied my own shoes this morning. Double knots and everything. I learned how to do it. And this morning, I don't even think I thought about it when I did it, except for I knew that I was going to use this illustration, so I probably thought about that. I made sure the bows were a little prettier than usual. Now I want to stand behind the pulpit so nobody can see my shoelaces. What seemed impossible to the people who didn't know how to do it is nothing to the people who do. And it's the same way with moving mountains. You see, what Jesus was trying to do when he said you could move mountains was think of the most impossible thing that he could present to the disciples in that moment. Because to the disciples, just like to us, when you say that you can tell a mountain to move and it'll happen, it seems impossible. But to the one who knows how to do it, it's nothing. To God, it's quite literally not even a challenge. You know, we went on a mission trip several years ago to the Appalachian Mountains. Have you ever been out there? Like the North Carolina, Tennessee, that area? I mean, I was talking earlier about the mountains we have here. Man, out there, they got some mountains. I mean, those things are huge. You drive, when you're crossing those mountains, you drive up literally forever. And then you drive down literally forever, and then you start over again. They even have these things on the side of the roads. They have these gravel and sand strips. They're like 200 yards. And what those are for is when the 18-wheeler's brakes go out because the mountain is too big, they just turn to the right and just go full speed into this sand pit, and it stops them and keeps them from dying. Their mountains are huge. If somebody in North Carolina or Tennessee happens to hear this sermon on the internet, until I get to this point, they're going to be like, mountains in Arkansas? What are you talking about? Those aren't mountains. Those are barely hills. And I think sometimes that's how God views the mountains in our lives. I think sometimes he's like, mountains, what are you talking about? That's nothing for me. And he's just watching and waiting for us to ask for him to move so that his glory and his magnificence and his power can be on full display. So that he can step in and say, look, I've got this. There is no obstacle that's too big for me. I read a story about a missionary. She told the children in the Latin American country where she was working about this story, about Jesus saying that we could move mountains. And these little kids, I mean, they're just eating it up. They're not like American kids that are skeptical about everything. I mean, they're loving it. And they get really excited because behind their village, there was this huge landmass that kept them from being able to see the ocean. So they told the missionary, God's going to move that mountain. We're going to pray and it's going to go away. And the missionary is like, oh no, what have I done? And she doesn't want them to be discouraged when God doesn't move this mountain. So she tries to redirect them, to point their attention a different way. But they're not having it. She's told them that Jesus can do anything. And she's told them that Jesus said, if you believe, this mountain can go away. So they're going to keep praying for it. And so they do. And the coolest thing happened. About 2 weeks after those little kids started praying that God would move that mountain, an engineer showed up in that village and asked the missionary if they could buy soil from them, because about 30 miles away they were building a highway and they needed fill dirt. These engineers came in with all their equipment and they took away the mountain that was blocking these kids' view of the sea and paid them for their trouble. Now some of you are like, come on, that's a coincidence, Pastor Brian. Well, I'll tell you something right now. I think a lot of what we attribute to coincidence is God. You may think it's a coincidence that when I heard that Pastor Randy Brown at Lowell Assembly of God had resigned, and I had no intentions of coming to Lowell to pastor a church, that I said they need to shut the doors on that building and plant a new church in Lowell, which is the craziest, most ludicrous idea that anyone could ever have. And that 2 weeks later, when I told God, I can't tell if you're telling me to go to Lowell or if I'm just being sentimental. You've got to give me a sign that the sectional presbyter used the exact same words about the exact same crazy idea in a meeting I was sitting in. You may think that's a coincidence. I think it's God. You may think it's a coincidence that while Christine and I were driving down the road one day and had made the decision to make this huge move, and Christina was having a moment of weakness, and I said, hey, God's got this. That literally 1 minute later, a Ford Explorer drove by us with a license plate that said, I got this. You may think that's a coincidence. I don't believe the odds of coincidences are that good. I believe it's God. And I also believe that if you look at your lives in hindsight, you'll realize that a lot of what you chalked up to being coincidence was God moving on your behalf. This missionary that I told you about came home, and she was sharing this story in a service, much like this one. At the end of that service, a little old lady who'd been in that church for years got up, walked over to a window and looked out and saw a mountain. And she said, "Mountain, move." And then she stood there and watched and waited. And after about 2 or 3 minutes of the mountain not moving, she turned around and shrugged and said, "See, I knew nothing was going to happen." Jesus' point wasn't about mountains, it was about faith. I think that so many times we as Christians will come to an altar, or we will get on our knees at home or whatever, and we'll ask God, "Lord, heal my leg," or "Lord, heal my marriage," or "Lord, help our finance," whatever. And then when nothing happens, we'll kind of shrug our shoulders and say, "See, I knew nothing was going to happen." I told somebody a while back that when God yells at me, I try to listen. When he presents me with the same thing over and over, I kind of take that to mean something. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. I haven't done it on purpose. But the past 3 sermons that I've preached from this pulpit were one called "Ask Your Dad" that was about prayer. One called Get Well Soon, that was about praying for healing. And then God had me preach this today. I don't know if he's trying to get through to me or if he's trying to get through to one of you. But I believe in prayer. I believe that God's word means what it says. Today, I know that there are some people here who are facing mountains in your lives. And I want to challenge you just this once. Have faith, real, true faith, that God's going to do what he said he's going to do.